Well, last year we had a little girl's best friend, the AI robot from hell, Megan, to get the horror year off to a surprisingly good start. And this year we have another little girl's best friend, an imaginary one, this time a teddy bear named Chauncey. And you hear that and you're like, aw, but then you look at the ratings for this film and you're like, ah. But the people have been wrong before. In fact, in this movie landscape, there's really only one man you can trust. So subscribe to my channel if you haven't, like this video, and hold tight, because the Scary Story Guy's review of Imaginary is next. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jake, the Scary Story Guy, and today we're talking about Imaginary, the latest in a pretty long string of, let's call them unsuccessful Blumhouse movies. Obviously, the studio has been supplanted by A24 over the years as the sort of premier horror production company, which is kind of incredible because A24 isn't even entirely horror. They're just a normal studio that sometimes does horror, but all the same, you know when A24 comes up before a horror movie, it's gonna be good. Contrast that to Blumhouse, which appears determined to, in between every Paranormal Activity and Insidious and The Black Phone, release just 15 absolutely towering piles of shit. A lot of these Blumhouse releases are verging on so bad it's good territory, though, and that means good content. So as someone in the content-making game, when I saw that Imaginary had a 4 on IMDb, I knew I had to see this for myself. Guess what, guys? It's actually not as bad as all that. I mean, it's not good, but to be a 4 on IMDb is an insult from the general public that could actually damage some careers. And so while I didn't like Imaginary, I do feel compelled to say a few words in its defense. Only a few, though, because let me reiterate, the movie's not good. Just briefly, Imaginary is about a woman who moves into her old childhood home with her new husband and 2 stepdaughters. One of the stepdaughters has an imaginary friend, it's a teddy bear named Chauncey, and things start to get weird. We can leave it at that. Alright, so the first thing to mention here are the 2 younger performances. I thought most of the adult acting here was actually kind of wooden and weird. I'm speaking specifically of DeWanda, who plays the lead in this movie. So I actually thought that the 2 stepdaughters ended up turning in the best performances, which is good, because a movie like this, you always are a little worried, like, I hope the child actors don't ruin it all. But they both did such a good job, I anticipate they'll both be getting work for a long time. I also think the movie is just kind of inherently funny, like in its subject matter, and it's got so many lines where it's like, was that supposed to be funny? Like, they're taking it so seriously, but it's like, it made me laugh. As an example, mild spoiler, but there's a scene where a little girl is talking with a therapist, her imaginary friend starts talking to the therapist, and the little girl's mouth, it sounds like it's her, but her lips aren't really moving. And afterwards, the therapist comes out and just sits the mom down and is like, has she been getting into any new hobbies lately? Ventriloquism. I don't know, there are parts of this movie where it does kind of seem like, okay, no, it actually is just taking itself too seriously. But for the most part, I thought it had a pretty respectable level of self-awareness. Either that, or it was so bad that it felt that way on accident. I also wasn't bored really at all during this movie, and it's not even all that short. It's like an hour 45. I thought it was paced really well. They kept the more intense scenes coming at a pretty good clip. And finally, and this is the thing I'm really surprised to be saying, I actually thought the horror imagery worked quite well here. Obviously, this isn't gonna actually be scary to anyone who's, graduated middle school. It's very much like Megan or Five Nights at Freddy's, and that it's kind of intended to be like, oh, 12-year-old's first horror movie. It's in that vein. But I just thought the execution of the scares was very technically effective a lot of times. There's a lot of things that are kind of like hidden in the background or creeping out of frame just as the camera angle switches. It has this effect of making you like kind of constantly scour the background for like, oh, what am I missing here? There's also a minor character, the stepkid's real mom, who only shows up a couple of times, but every time she does, it's like, oh, wow, things actually got a bit freaky there. She's really good. The way she's used is really good. There's actually a lot of influence in one scene especially from Coraline, which, talk about a kid's movie that has some underrated scares. But unfortunately, I think a far more obvious and hackneyed comparison needs to be made with this movie, which is a film I referenced earlier, Insidious. This is basically Insidious. I don't want to get into exactly why, because it would constitute a major spoiler, but just suffice it to say that the entire second half of this movie is basically just Insidious, but with imaginary friends. And not in the sense of like, oh, this movie was inspired by, it took some influences from Insidious. No, it's just straight up Insidious. And it's like, your studio has already released 5 of these movies. We don't need a 6th. How lazy are you? Although I will say this actually wasn't worse than the most recent Insidious movie, to be honest. It's like, imagine if in the early 1940s, Disney had been like, all right, next movie, here we go. Let's do a princess, maybe? And maybe she's got some friends. Let's say 6 or 7. Maybe they're gnomes. People eat that shit up. You get the idea. It's just a surprisingly original premise here with Imaginary to feel so unoriginal. Guys, at the end of the day, Imaginary is certainly nothing special. It's just a blatant ripoff of other better horror films. It's not especially well acted, it's not especially well written, and it certainly won't be scary to anyone over the age of 14. That being said, for what it is, for what it's trying to be, it does the job. It isn't boring. The horror elements are at least crafted with some care. It's quite funny at times, whether intentionally or not. And yeah, I didn't come out of the theater feeling pissed off, like I just wasted my time in some unforgivable way, so I'll take it. I'm gonna give Imaginary 2.5 stars out of 5. And I know that's technically a 5 out of 10, which is very close to the 4.9 out of 10 that it currently has on IMDb, so you're probably like, what gives? But you know this, IMDb grades are so inflated, that website just spots you the first 5 stars. I have seen absolute garbage score in the mid to high 6s on IMDb, so a 4.9 is a catastrophe. But this isn't a catastrophe, it's just not very good. Alright guys, as always, stay tuned for more spooky content coming soon. But in the meantime, thank you for watching this video, and here's hoping you survive to see the next one.